Put the basket down, ma'am.
Is there a problem, officer?
We had a report of a shoplifter matching your description. I need to see your ID and the receipt for everything in that basket right now.
I don't have a receipt yet because I'm still shopping, officer.
Turn around or I will make you turn around.
I am clearly telling you that I am a federal agent.
I don't care what you think you are.
And my federal ID is in my pocket, but I need you to step back first.
You need to turn around and go on your knees.
The overhead lights hummed with a cold, white glow as Simone reached for a bundle of fresh kale. She didn't look up, but she didn't have to. Her years of training as a Navy Marshal had sharpened her senses to a fine edge. She felt the heavy, rhythmic tread of boots on the linoleum floor long before the shadow fell over her. To anyone else, it was just another shopper. To Simone, it was a threat profile moving at a purposeful speed. Officer Vincent Vance didn't tap her on the shoulder or clear his throat. He stepped directly into her personal space, his chest nearly brushing her shoulder, a move designed to make a person feel small. He stood with his legs apart, his hand resting near the heavy gear on his utility belt. His face was set in a hard, practiced scowl. He didn't see a federal officer. He saw someone he thought he could break. "Put the basket down, ma'am," Vance said, his voice loud enough to make a nearby elderly couple turn their heads. Simone slowly turned to face him. She kept her movements fluid and calm, her hands wrapped firmly around the handle of her green grocery basket. Inside, the bright reds of the tomatoes and the deep greens of the cucumbers looked like a still life painting. She didn't drop the basket. She didn't flinch. She simply looked him in the eye, her expression as still as a lake. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked quietly. "We had a report of a shoplifter matching your description," Vance lied, his fingers snapping up to point directly at her face. It was a classic escalation tactic. "I need to see your ID and the receipt for everything in that basket right now." Simone felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, the combat itch she had felt in high-stakes transport missions. Her heart rate stayed low, her breathing steady. She knew the store's security camera was tucked just behind a sign for organic apples, its red light blinking like a steady heartbeat. "I'm still shopping, officer. I don't have a receipt because I haven't reached the register yet," she explained, her voice a model of professional patience. "And as I told you, my federal credentials are in my pocket. I can show them to you, but I need you to step back first." Vance's face flushed a deep, angry red. He wasn't used to people speaking to him with such level-headed authority. In his mind, her calm was a challenge, a sign of disrespect. He stepped even closer, his shadow swallowing her completely. The air between them felt tight, like a wire pulled until it was ready to snap. Simone knew this was no longer about a fake shoplifting report. This was about a man who had never been told no, trying to force a woman of power to bow. She held her ground, a quiet storm waiting for the first strike. Simone Sterling did not reach for her badge. She knew that in a tense moment, any fast move toward a pocket could be seen as a threat by an officer looking for an excuse to get violent. Instead, she took a slow, deep breath, letting the cool air of the produce section settle her nerves. This was the discipline of a marshal, a quiet strength that came from years of high-stakes federal service. She had faced down armed fugitives and secured chaotic courtrooms, all by staying colder and calmer than the person across from her. She looked at Officer Vance, whose face was twitching with a mix of anger and impatience. He was leaning in so close she could smell the stale coffee on his breath. Most people would have backed away or started shouting, but Simone remained as still as a statue. She knew that every second she stayed calm, she was winning the invisible battle. She was making it impossible for him to claim she was the aggressor. "Officer Vance," she said, her voice dropping to a low, steady tone that commanded respect. "I understand you have a job to do, but I am telling you clearly, I am a federal agent. I have not taken anything. If you check the cameras above us, you will see I have been in this aisle for exactly 3 minutes, simply picking out vegetables for my dinner." Vance didn't look up at the cameras. He didn't want to see the truth. He wanted to see her break. He reached out and slapped the green grocery basket, nearly knocking it from her hand. A bell pepper tumbled out and bounced across the floor, its bright skin looking out of place on the white tile. "I don't care what you think you are," Vance hissed, his voice trembling with a strange kind of excitement. "In this town, on this floor, I am the one in charge. You are going to turn around, or I am going to make you turn around." Simone felt a flash of heat behind her eyes, a natural human response to being bullied. But she pushed it down. She thought about her training and the oath she had taken. She wasn't just Simone Sterling right now. She was a representative of the law. If she fought him, she would be just like him. She chose to be better. She kept her hands visible and her eyes locked on his, waiting for him to make the next move that would surely be his last as a police officer. Officer Vincent Vance did not care about the facts or the security cameras watching from above. He only cared about power and being the person in control. For 15 years, he had walked the streets with a heavy chip on his shoulder and a badge that he treated like a shield. In his mind, the uniform gave him the right to be the judge and the jury on the spot. He was 40 years old now, with a face that seemed permanently stuck in a scowl, and he carried a hot-headed anger that had followed him since his very first day on the job. Back at the police station, tucked away in a metal filing cabinet, Vance's personnel file was thick with papers that should have ended his career a long time ago. There were several reports of him using way too much force during simple traffic stops. There were complaints from citizens who said he had shouted at them or pushed them for no reason at all. At least 3 times, he had been accused of targeting people just because of the color of their skin. These were red flags that warned of a man who was ready to snap. But his supervisors had chosen to look the other way. They called him old school, or said he was just tough on crime. Because he was never punished for his mistakes, Vance learned a dangerous lesson. He believed he could get away with almost anything. As he stood in the produce aisle, Vance felt a familiar surge of excitement. He didn't see Simone as a person or a professional. He saw her as a way to prove he was the boss of the room. He liked the way the bright store lights reflected off his gold shoulder patches, and he liked the intimidating sound of his heavy utility belt rattling as he moved. He was used to seeing people tremble or get angry when he confronted them, and he often used that fear as an excuse to get even more aggressive. Simone watched him with the focused eyes of a trained marshal. She noticed the way he shifted his weight from side to side, a habit of men who are preparing to strike. She saw the squint in his eyes and the way his jaw was clamped shut so tight that the muscles in his neck were bulging. To an ordinary shopper, he might have looked like a serious police officer doing a hard job. But to Simone, he looked like a ticking time bomb. She knew his history without even having to read his file. In her line of work, she had seen men like him in every corner of the world. Men who used a uniform to hide their own deep weaknesses and fears. While Vance was busy trying to scare her into submission, Simone was busy documenting every detail of his behavior in her mind. She noted the time, his badge number, and the exact words he used. She knew that his long history of using force was finally about to hit a dead end. Vance thought he was the one in charge of this moment, but he didn't realize that his past and his present were about to collide in a way that would change his life forever. He was stepping into a trap made of his own bad choices, and the rec light on the ceiling was recording every single one of them. The vibrant green kale and bright red peppers seemed to glow under the store lights, making the scene feel even more strange. Simone stood perfectly still, her grocery basket hanging from her arm like a shield. She could see the elderly couple from the next aisle watching from a distance, their faces full of worry. They knew something was wrong, but they were too afraid to step closer. To them, it looked like a standard police investigation. To Simone, it was a trap being set by a man who didn't care about the rules. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Vance said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Where did you hide the items? I saw you walking through the pharmacy section earlier. People like you always think the small stuff is easy to slip into a pocket." Simone didn't blink. "Officer, I haven't been near the pharmacy today. I came straight to the produce section for these vegetables. If you would just take a moment to look at the security footage, or even just look at my credentials, this would all be over." Vance laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a cold, sharp sound that echoed off the glass doors of the refrigerator cases. "I don't need a tape to tell me what I'm looking at. I've been doing this long enough to know a guilty face when I see one. You're stalling because you're waiting for a chance to run." He stepped even closer, encroaching on her space until their boots were almost touching. He pointed his finger again, this time so close to her nose that she could feel the air move. You fit the description of a woman who walked out of here with a bag full of unpaid electronics yesterday. Same height, same look. Now, are you going to cooperate? Or do I have to make a scene in front of all these people? Simone felt the weight of the moment. She knew that fitting the description was the oldest excuse in the book for someone who didn't have a real reason to stop her. She looked at the green cucumbers and crisp lettuce in her basket, then back at the man who was trying to turn a simple grocery trip into a crime. She realized that Vance wasn't looking for a thief. He was looking for a victim. I am cooperating, Simone said, her voice remaining as smooth as glass. But I will not be bullied into confessing to something I didn't do. My hands are right here. I am not moving. If you want to escalate this, that is your choice, but remember that the camera is watching both of us. Vance's eyes darted up to the camera for the very first time, and for a split second, Simone saw a flash of doubt in his expression. But his pride was too large to let him back down now. He turned back to her, his face twisting into a mask of pure aggression. The peaceful atmosphere of the produce section was gone, replaced by a tension so thick it felt like it might snap the very air around them. Simone braced herself, not with her muscles, but with her mind, ready for the storm she knew was coming. The air in the produce section felt colder now, as if the store's cooling system had shifted to match the freezing tension between the two people. Simone Sterling could feel the heat radiating off Officer Vance's body. He was looking for any reason to use his hands. Simone knew that if she raised her voice, he would call it disorderly conduct. If she stepped back, he would call it fleeing. If she reached for her badge too quickly, he might call it a threat. She was trapped in a situation where a single wrong move could change her life forever. Yet she stood as firm as the concrete floor beneath her. This was where her years of intense training took over. In the Navy Marshals, she had learned that true power isn't about who is the loudest or who can push the hardest. It is about who has the most control over their own mind and body. She made a conscious choice to remain completely still. She kept her fingers loosely gripped on the handle of her green grocery basket, showing she had nothing to hide and no weapon to draw. She didn't let her anger show in her eyes, even though her heart was pounding against her ribs like a drum in a quiet room. "Officer," she said, her voice so quiet and steady that it forced Vance to lean in and stop his own shouting just to hear her. "I am not resisting you. I am standing right here. I am choosing to be calm because I know that I have done nothing wrong." Vance did not like that answer. He didn't want a conversation. He wanted a confrontation. He wanted her to scream, to cry, or to plead for mercy. To a man like Vance, those reactions were the only things that made him feel powerful. When she didn't give him what he wanted, his frustration grew into a visible twitch in his jaw. He began to pace in a small, tight circle, his heavy black boots squeaking loudly on the white linoleum tiles. He was trying to build up his own anger, trying to convince himself that this woman was a dangerous criminal instead of a citizen simply buying vegetables for her dinner. Simone watched him with the focused, predator-like eyes of a marshal, though she kept her body as relaxed as a lamb. She noticed the way his hand kept twitching toward the heavy metal handcuffs on his belt. She knew that he was losing the mental battle. In her experience, when men like Vance lose the mental battle, they almost always turn to physical force to get their way. Across the aisle, a teenager pulled out a cell phone to record the scene, and the elderly couple from earlier whispered to each other in fear. Simone felt the weight of their stares, but she didn't look away from Vance. She knew that by staying calm, she was making sure that when the store's security tape was played back later, there would be no doubt about who was the bully and who was the victim. She was protecting her future by refusing to play his game. She was a marshal, and she would hold the line of her own dignity until the very end, no matter how much he tried to shake her. She was the calm at the center of the storm, waiting for the recording to capture the truth. The blinking red light of the security camera seemed to pulse in time with the tension in the room. High above the shelves of apples and oranges, the lens recorded every detail in sharp, clear lines. It saw Simone Sterling standing perfectly still, her hands visible and her face calm. It also saw Officer Vincent Vance lose the last bit of his self-control. Vance's patience finally snapped. He didn't want words or logic anymore. He wanted to prove he could dominate the space. Without any warning, he reached out and grabbed Simone's wrist with a grip that was meant to hurt. The green grocery basket fell from her arm, hitting the floor with a loud crash. Cucumbers rolled under the refrigerated shelves, and a plastic container of cherry tomatoes burst open, scattering like red marbles across the white tile. "I told you to turn around," Vance screamed, his voice cracking with rage. In one violent motion, he spun Simone toward the produce display. He used his weight to shove her forward, slamming her chest against the cold, metal edge of the vegetable rack. The impact knocked the wind out of her, but Simone didn't fight back with her fists. She knew that the camera was catching the rec frame of this exact moment. It showed her body going limp to absorb the blow, while Vance's face was twisted into a mask of pure aggression. He pressed his forearm into the back of her neck, pinning her head down against a pile of bell peppers. The cold mist from the vegetable sprayer dampened her hair as he fumbled for the handcuffs on his belt. The sound of the metal ratcheting shut was sharp and cold in the quiet store. Simone felt the steel bite into her skin, but she kept her eyes open, looking straight into the lens of the camera across the aisle. Around them, the store had gone silent. The shoppers were frozen in place, watching the brutal scene. Vance was breathing heavily, his chest heaving as if he had just finished a long fight, even though Simone had not resisted once. He shoved her again, forcing her to her knees on the hard floor. As she knelt there among the crushed vegetables, Simone didn't feel defeated. She felt a strange sense of clarity. Every shove, every bruise, and every angry word was now a permanent digital record. Vance thought he was winning, but the red light on the ceiling was telling a different story, one that would soon be seen by the entire world. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the only noise in the produce section. Officer Vance stood over Simone, his chest puffed out like a rooster. He looked around at the small crowd of shoppers, waiting for someone to tell him what a good job he was doing. But no one cheered. Instead, a heavy, uncomfortable silence filled the air. The store manager, a thin man with a nervous habit of tapping his pen against his clipboard, hurried over from the front desk. "Officer, what is going on?" the manager asked, his eyes darting from the spilled tomatoes on the floor to the woman kneeling in cuffs. "Is all this really necessary?" Vance didn't even look at him. "I'm handling a shoplifting suspect. Stay back and let me do my job." This was the moment where the thin blue line began to fail. In the world of law enforcement, there is an unwritten rule that officers should support one another. But that support is supposed to be based on truth and justice. As Vance continued to growl orders, a second officer, a younger man named Miller, walked through the sliding glass doors of the store. He had been called as backup. Miller looked at the scene and immediately felt a knot in his stomach. He saw Simone, who was perfectly calm despite being pinned to the floor, and he saw Vance, who was acting like he was in the middle of a street brawl. "Vincent, take it easy," Miller whispered, stepping closer. "What's the charge?" "Shoplifting and resisting," Vance snapped. "She's been difficult since the moment I stopped her." Miller looked at Simone's face. He didn't see a criminal. He saw a woman who looked like she was observing a science experiment. Then he looked up at the security camera. He knew the manager of this store, and he knew these cameras were state-of-the-art. They recorded audio and video in high definition. If Vance was lying, it was all right there on the hard drive. "Did you find the merchandise?" Miller asked quietly. "I haven't searched her yet," Vance admitted, his voice losing some of its edge. "But I know she's got it. She fits the description from the bulletin." Miller knew that bulletin. It was for a woman who was 5 inches shorter than Simone and at least 10 years younger. The thin blue line was supposed to protect officers, but Miller realized that if he helped Vance right now, he would be helping a man commit a crime. He watched as Vance pulled Simone to her feet by her arms, a move that was much rougher than it needed to be. The other shoppers weren't staying quiet anymore. The teenager with the phone was still recording, and a woman in the back shouted, "She didn't do anything. "We saw the whole thing." Vance ignored them, but his hand was shaking. For the first time in 15 years, the wall of silence he usually hid behind was starting to crumble. His fellow officer was doubting him, the witnesses were recording him, and the woman he was holding was the calmest person in the room. The system that usually protected men like Vance was finally breaking down, and all it took was one person who refused to play his game and a camera that never blinked. Simone stood tall, even with her hands behind her back, knowing that the truth was already out of Vance's reach. By the time the police car pulled away from the grocery store with Simone in the back seat, the digital world was already starting to move. The teenager who had been standing near the apples didn't wait. He didn't call a lawyer or wait for the morning news. He simply hit a button on his phone and uploaded the video he had recorded to the internet. Under the bright store lights, he had captured the truth that Officer Vance tried to hide. Within minutes, the video began to spread like wildfire. It wasn't just a grainy clip. Because the store had such high-quality cameras, every word was clear. People sitting in their living rooms miles away could hear Simone's calm, steady voice. They could see her empty hands and her peaceful posture. Most importantly, they saw the exact moment Vance's face twisted with anger, and he slammed a federal marshal into the metal vegetable rack. The internet headline was simple but powerful. Cop assaults Black Navy Marshal at grocery store. It was a title that demanded attention. At first, a few dozen people watched it. Then, a few thousand. By the time the sun began to set, millions of people across the country had seen the blinking wreck frame. They saw the cherry tomatoes rolling across the floor, and the way the handcuffs bit into Simone's wrists while she remained extremely passive. The comments under the video were a storm of outrage. People were shocked not just by the violence, but by the fact that even a high-ranking hero like Simone wasn't safe from being profiled. National news stations picked up the story, playing the footage on giant screens. They paused the video on Vance's angry face and zoomed in on the wreck icon in the corner, proving that this wasn't just a story. It was undeniable proof. As the video went viral, the pressure on the police department began to grow. The phone lines at the station started ringing off the hook. People were calling from every state, demanding to know why an innocent woman was in a jail cell while the officer who attacked her was still wearing a badge. The thin blue line that had protected Vance for 15 years was being melted away by the heat of public opinion. Simone sat in her cell, unaware of the digital explosion happening outside. She didn't have her phone, but she didn't need it. She knew the truth had been recorded. She knew that in the modern world, a camera lens is more powerful than a badge. While Vance was likely writing a false report back at the precinct, the digital truth was already halfway around the world, making sure he would never be able to tell a lie again. The quiet produce aisle had become the center of a national conversation, and the blinking red light of the security camera had become Simone's greatest witness. The courtroom was tall and quiet, filled with the smell of old wood and floor wax. Large windows let in the afternoon sun, but the air inside felt heavy and serious. Simone Sterling sat at the front table, wearing her formal Navy uniform. Her medals shined under the lights, and her hair was pulled back in a neat, professional style. She sat with her back straight, looking forward with the same calm she had shown in the grocery store. This time, however, she wasn't alone. Behind her sat rows of people who had seen the video online and wanted to see justice happen. On the other side of the room, Vincent Vance sat with his lawyer. He wasn't wearing his police uniform anymore. Instead, he wore a plain gray suit that seemed a little too tight. Without his badge and his utility belt, he looked smaller and less sure of himself. He kept his eyes on the table, avoiding the gaze of the many people in the room. The judge called the court to order, and the room became so silent you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. The prosecutor stood up and began to play the security footage on a large screen. Everyone watched as the wreck icon blinked in the corner. The sound of the produce misters and the crashing grocery basket filled the room. When the video reached the moment where Vance slammed Simone against the metal rack, a soft gasp went through the crowd. Simone's lawyer called her to the stand. She walked with a steady pace and took the oath to tell the truth. Her voice was clear as she described exactly what had happened. She didn't exaggerate or show anger. She simply stated the facts. She explained how she had tried to show her credentials and how she had chosen to remain passive to ensure the truth was caught on camera. "I have spent my life serving the law," Simone told the judge. "I expected the law to protect me that day. Instead, I was treated like a criminal because of how I looked." When it was Vance's turn to speak, his story began to fall apart. He tried to claim that Simone had been aggressive, but the video showed she hadn't moved a muscle. He tried to say he followed department rules, but his own fellow officer, Miller, testified that the force used was unnecessary and wrong. The thin blue line had truly snapped. The judge didn't take long to make a decision. She looked directly at Vance and told him that his behavior was a disgrace to the badge. She talked about how his history of misconduct had finally caught up to him. The judge ruled that Vance was guilty of assault and official misconduct. She ordered that he be removed from the police force forever and sentenced him to time in prison to reflect on his actions. As the gavel hit the wooden desk with a loud bang, a feeling of relief washed over Simone. Justice wasn't just a word anymore. It was real. She had stood her ground without using her fists, and she had won. As she walked out of the courtroom, she knew that this wasn't just a victory for her, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly. The digital truth had done its job, and the law had finally held its own accountable. The news of the trial spread even faster than the original video. In the weeks that followed, the grocery store became a place of reflection rather than a place of fear. People left flowers and small notes of thanks near the produce section, honoring the courage it took for Simone to stay calm while being treated so poorly. For Simone, the victory in the courtroom was just the beginning. She knew that true justice wasn't just about punishing one bad officer. It was about making sure the system changed so that no one else would have to stand where she had stood. Simone used her voice to speak at community meetings and city council hearings. She sat at long tables with city leaders, her Navy Marshal uniform a symbol of the high standard she expected from everyone in uniform. She didn't speak with anger, but with a firm belief that things could be better. Because of her story and the undeniable proof of the security footage, the city passed a new law called the Sterling Standard. This law required every police officer to wear body cameras that could never be turned off, and it created a new team of citizens to look at every report of excessive force. Officer Miller, the young man who had dared to doubt Vance in the grocery store, became a leader in the department's new training program. He used the video of that night to teach new recruits about the thin blue line and why it must never be used to hide the truth. He taught them that a badge is a responsibility, not a license to bully. The department began to focus on de-escalation, teaching officers how to use their words to calm a situation down instead of using their hands to heat it up. Simone eventually went back to her normal life, but she was forever changed. She still shopped at the same grocery store, walking down the same aisle where the tomatoes had once been scattered. Now, when people saw her, they didn't see a suspect. They saw a hero who had used her discipline to fix a broken system. The wreck icon on the security cameras now felt like a promise of safety rather than a warning of danger. The story of the Navy Marshal and the grocery store assault became a lesson in schools and police academies across the country. It proved that one person's choice to remain calm, combined with the power of the truth, could move mountains. Simone Sterling had set a new standard, a standard where character matters more than a description, and where the law truly applies to everyone, even those who wear the badge. As the sun set on a new day in the city, the streets felt a little safer and the future felt a little brighter, all because a brave woman refused to let a lie become the final word.